ED pills aren't for you? Well, you could try this instead. I'm Dr. Trish Leigh, brain health and sex addiction recovery coach. ED pills aren't for everyone, and I'll tell you why. Typically, there's two groups of people that ED pills do not work for. Number one is someone who wants a drug-free, holistic, non-invasive approach to solving sexual arousal dysfunction. So that's the person who doesn't want to have to depend on putting a pill into their mouth to be able to become aroused. Now, group number two, they're willing to use that pill, but it doesn't work for them. So if you fall into one of these two groups, stay tuned because I'm going to give you powerful alternatives that actually heal arousal dysfunction in your body. So let's dive in. What causes arousal dysfunction? Well, you may have heard that arousal dysfunction can be caused by dysregulation or not working of your sex organs. So for some people, that is the case. It's a body problem, a physiological problem. But in today's day and age of high levels of porn consumption, consumption of explicit matter of all kinds, and especially excessive screen time, we now know that people are depending more on high levels of dopamine than ever before. And unfortunately, what happens there is that because of neuroplasticity and conditioning, your brain becomes conditioned to go to the screen or to hypersexuality for very high levels of dopamine. Those high levels of dopamine lead to desensitization in the reward center in your brain and in the reward pathways that feed forward from the reward center in the midbrain to the frontal lobe. There's scientific studies that prove this, and there's a multitude of scientific studies that have proven this for a very long time in terms of compulsive behaviors and addiction. Now studies are showing this absolutely applies to porn consumption and explicit matter. So neuroplasticity and conditioning back to high levels of dopamine is the primary problem for most people. Now, if you try ED pills and they don't work, it's because your brain has become so desensitized. Yes, that can happen. So when you flood your system with very high levels of dopamine, you feel good. What it does for you is it increases pleasure in your brain and your nervous system, but unfortunately increases that pleasure to supernormal levels, more than 10. On a healthy scale of arousal, your baseline should be 5. Right in the middle of 1 to 10. If you've developed a porn habit and if you've been feeding that habit over a long time, what happens is your brain has become accustomed to level 15 of stimulation. That is from the scenes, the scenarios, the performers, the acts that you are consuming. Now it's time to be with your human partner, who on a good day is a 7, if you know what I mean, and now you have difficulty performing. It's because the arousal gap from 7 to 15 is an 8-point spread. And if you're watching football these days, you know that sometimes an 8-point spread can be a game changer or a game loser in this case. So what we want to do is close the gap in healthy arousal and what your brain currently needs. Too much arousal to be able to perform sexually, to be able to feel satisfied sexually, and to ward off performance anxiety. Now let's transition to the idea of performance anxiety. We know at the root of porn-induced sexual arousal dysfunction is a dysregulated or dysfunctional brain pattern. That brain pattern is one of a brain that's running either in one of two patterns. The first one I call strain brain, a wired and tired pattern. This will make you feel anxious, exhausted, and overwhelmed all at the same time, or you will swing back and forth between them in what I refer to as the pendulum effect. Now, if you do that for any amount of time, and especially if you do it for a long time, consuming porn, feeling really good, getting that burst in your brain, dopamine flood, which leads you back into your life where there is a dopamine deficit, hence the increase in anxiety, depression, the increase in porn-induced ADHD or difficulty focusing, memory and concentration issues, pendulum effect, too fast, too slow, swinging back and forth. Now what can happen is you tip over into artificial neutral, what I call drain brain. If you get stuck in drain brain, This is what inherently causes semi-permanent erectile dysfunction or sexual arousal dysfunction. You get stuck in artificial neutral from very high levels of dopamine. So what that does is it makes it so that the ED pills don't work. You fall into category number 2. Now, you might fall into both categories because you might not want to take the pills, but out of desperation you do, and they don't work. Now, what happens because of this dysregulated, dysfunctional brain pattern is you will now feel more anxiety. So inherently you have performance anxiety, but this brain pattern, strain brain, that's caused by porn consumption and explicit matter, it causes more anxiety. I know the whole thing is a cruel joke because you get stuck in this pattern because of explicit matter, which perpetuates and keeps you in this situation. So what is the solution? If you're not going to take the pills, first of all, I want to tell you, the pills are a Band-Aid. They help you in the moment, but they inherently do not regulate a dysfunctional brain pattern. It's a Band-Aid. It stops the bleeding for the moment, but it's not stitches. What I advocate for you and for everybody in this situation is that they get stitches for the brain. Now, obviously, we're not going in there and physically stitching your brain. We are using stitches for brain functioning. It is called neurofeedback. Neurofeedback brain training has thousands of studies that show that it's effective and efficient in closing the arousal gap in a person's brain when they're struggling with arousal dysfunction. The way that it works is the first step is to have a QEEG brain map done. It's performed, you do it at home. It takes less than 28 minutes, and then you meet with me or someone on my team so that we can evaluate your brain map for you. I will lay eyes on your brain map and I will be able to share with you the levels of dysfunction that are happening in every area of your brain. The more dysfunction, the more areas involved, the more sexual arousal dysfunction that you will suffer from. It's easily visualized in your brain. You can see it on a QEEG brain map. Then from there, what happens is I set very specific individualized protocols for you for exactly what your brain needs. I set those protocols so that you have your starting point of the big arousal gap. And then with every session, day by day, the gap begins to close. For some of my clients, the gap closes quickly. Just like for some people, when they get stitches, their skin heals up very quickly. For other people, it is an incremental change, but there's charts and graphs that show you that yes, indeed, your brain functioning is improving. The brain stitches are working. It uses something called operant conditioning. Most people know about Pavlov's dog. Pavlov rang a bell and his dogs would salivate. It was a cue and a response that is reinforced. The way neurofeedback works is you're watching a screen with my proprietary app. In the app, the screen goes brighter and the audio goes louder when your brain is hitting the parameters that I've set. If your brain goes back to that arousal gap, dysfunctional brain pattern, the screen goes dim and the audio goes low. Your brain will work for the reward. It will chase down the reward that you give it. So when you use neurofeedback, the reward is the healthy brain pattern that allows you to feel healthy baseline arousal, calm alertness, and allows you to become aroused in a sexual situation with your honey. So this is the solution. We know from science, neurological dysfunction is at the core of porn-induced erectile dysfunction. So the solution is at the core. It's resolving and alleviating that arousal gap in your brain. It's proven effective through science, and it absolutely works. Now, we also include coaching in the program because coaching is very important and it's very powerful because this is what also needs to happen. You need to stay away from explicit matter because every time you go back to explicit matter, you continue to desensitize the reward center in your brain. And remember, we're in resensitized mode. No desensitizing, only resensitizing. So porn use has to be eliminated. Screen time has to be managed. It is a lower level supernormal stimulus, so it must be managed. At the same time, healthy sexuality in your real life must be established so that your brain will chase down the reward of being with your partner instead of going to the screen. At the same time, what I want for you is a pleasure pathway reset. So you reset pleasure in your brain entirely. You're no longer going to the screen for pleasure. Instead, you're going into your real world experiences. You're going into your purpose. intention, the one thing that you were designed to contribute to planet Earth so that when you leave, your goal has been achieved. However big or small you think it is, it's important. Purpose. Also being with your people. So it might be your partner or your honey, but just building intimacy with all your people again. There's so much pleasure in hanging out with your peeps. I want that for you. You can see me hanging out with my peeps all the time on my Instagram page. I'm always posting pictures of us, like the one of me sledding on a sheet of ice this past week. Okay, and then lastly, your hobbies, the things you used to love to do before you found explicit matter. This is how you reset the pleasure pathways in your brain and your life. All right, if you're looking for help on this journey, please go over to drtrishleigh.com, schedule a consult with a brain health professional who can help you. I hope to see you over there, and as always, control your brain or it'll control you.